Today we're going to be taking a look at two hands played recently between LLinusLLove and Berri. These two guys have been playing a heads-up match for a few months now already. Maybe a year long already, to be honest. Not sure when it started. And they have played a lot of interesting hands in this period. And today we're going to take a look at two hands they played in the last few weeks, which will hopefully allow us to learn a thing or two about this game. Before we jump into that, let me hear about you guys. Who has ever played heads up or is interested in learning heads up for the future, or has done any work in heads up no limit? Who has done any work in heads up here? Joseph Adams said he has. Steve Sambor also said he has. Nice. So you guys play it regularly or just as a theoretical curiosity? Philip said just short stack. Interesting. Short stack. Maybe for spinning goals or something like that? What it is about that you have learned? Oh, MTT background. Okay. Joseph said when there's a fish. Interesting. Ivan said very little deep work, but played some a couple of years ago. I like to think I have some experience. Cool. Steve said tournament study mostly. And then as I enjoyed it, I focus on heads up sitting goes. Nice. I used to talk to a few people who played heads up sitting goes like 5 years ago, 6 years ago, which was a time that people were already stopping to play that, it seemed, because of bots and all that stuff and RTA, but it's a pretty cool game nonetheless. All right, so you guys have done at least some digging or have at least saw some sins. That's cool. Heads up is really important at high stakes. A lot of times you're going to be trying to hold the lobby and people are going to be offering some action. It's important to be able to hold your own when playing heads up. And it's a very fun game as well because you play like 80 VPIP or something, which is very different from 6 max where you play 25 VPIP. I personally enjoy a lot heads up because of that reason. You're just always playing hands and playing and being challenged to play different spots. 6 max can be quite boring, especially if you just play regular tables, which is the case of high stakes. It's very low action, very slow action a lot of the time. I like heads up to spice things up. So sometimes I play some heads up zoom on stars. All right, let's just jump into the hands. I'm going to show the hand in this YouTube channel. I mentioned it before. A lot of you probably already follow it or are subscribed to it, which is called Online High Stakes Poker. They post hand history replays on that channel. It's pretty cool. Check it out sometime. All right, so I'm gonna put it here. And I'm gonna share my screen. Yeah, this should be good. Screen 2. All right. Let me know if you guys can see it. I'm gonna put the chat here in the bottom or on the left. Nice. So this hand was played 3 weeks ago, apparently. It's not extremely recent, but it's recent. So let's start. So Linus opens up here on the button for 2.5. Berri calls. Flop is 10-3 deuce rainbow. Linus goes out for a small C bet. Berri raises for a small size, about half pot raise here. He does. Linus goes ahead and 3 bets. You guys are going to see that we're going to talk a lot about the flop here. Linus goes ahead and 3 bets. Not happy about it. Berri decides to 4-bet the flop. It's a very small sizing again. Linus calls. Turn is at 10. Berri goes for a third pot bet on the 10. Linus calls. River is an offsuit 8. Berri shoves for about half pot. Linus calls. Berri shows up with queen jack off, and Linus has ace 10. Now, there's a lot to unpack here on this hand, but first of all, let me hear about you guys. What did you think about both players' line here? What do you think about Berri's line? Is it good? Is it GTO? Is it bad? Is it spew? Is it exploit? What do you think about Linus play? Is it good? Is it GTO? Is it bad? Let me hear your guys' opinions before we jump into the analysis and the solutions to try and make sense of what happened. Could you repeat it just one more time? Yeah. So Linus opens 2.5 on the button. Berri calls. Flop is 10, 3 deuce. Where is it? Flop is 10, 3 deuce rainbow. Linus c-bet small size, about 30%, a little bit less than 1/3. Berri raises small, about half pot check raise. Linus 3-bets the flop. Berri 4-bets the flop, about a min raise 4-bet. Linus calls. Turn, he goes for a third pot bet on the 10. Linus calls, and then river he shoves for half pot. Linus calls, he has queen jack, Linus has ace 10. Joseph said Linus seems good. Berri, come on, I don't know. What is it that come on? Vincent said I was lost after the 3-bet flop. Philip said the flop 4-bet is nothing I have in my repertoire. Yeah, we're gonna talk about the flop, whether it makes sense to go there or to construct that range and how to construct that range. So who else? Who here likes Berri's play? Who here thinks that it is definitely a correct play and part of a GTO solution or something that you would do exploitatively or theoretically? Who likes Berri's play here? Ivan said very tough spot. For whom exactly? Haven't studied much bet 3-bet spots. Yeah. Vincent said, I don't like Berri play since Linus range seems very strong on the river. So you think it should be an exploitative give up because Linus range is too strong? Matthias said, I don't like the raise from Berri. I would prefer backdoor flush draw hands like Jack 4, Queen 4 suited. So you don't like the initial check raise or the pre-flop 4-bet, Matthias? Ivan said it is a very tough spot for us to analyze. Okay, yes. Steve said, I wouldn't do it at present as don't know nearly enough about it, which makes it look a bit spewy, but I think it's probably a fine combo with flop equity and blockers. Nice. James said, I think the bluff looks okay at some frequency, but I don't play heads up. All right, some people are saying they don't like it. Some people say they think it's probably fine. Okay, let's take a look then at the solution and try to learn a few things about this spot, about poker in general, right? Matthias said, I don't like the 4-bet, and I think I also don't like the initial check raise. Cool. So we're going to talk about that. First of all, do you guys like the Linus small size on this texture? What do you think of how the two ranges look like on this texture? Which sizing is correct an attack like this in heads up? Would you size it differently compared to Linus, or would you also bet small? Small seems fine. 33, good. All right. Let's take a look here at the small blind c-bet strategy. We're going to be using the solutions we have available here. And we see that if you wanted to bet bigger, you would also be totally fine here in Linus's shoes, right? So there's a strategy which is pretty much evenly distributed between 2/3 pot and a third pot. One thing that happens with the third pot on a board like this is that you don't lead the nice equity to the high cards and barely to the high cards, because the high cards, a lot of the high cards are going to be 3 bets pre-flop from OOP. So a two-thirds bet is also fine due to the overpair and 10x advantage and the possibility to deny equity to some hands with a little bit more EV in the OOP's range. But we see that both strategies are totally fine. If you want to mix two sides, if you want to pick one over the other, I highly doubt if you just pick 2/3 or check, you would lose any EV at all here, right? But at this point, totally fine. We see ace 10 mixing both options, preferring to bet bigger in terms of frequency, but mixing both options. Now, when it comes to the check raise strategy, who thinks queen jack is part of the check raise range? Who thinks queen jack is not part of the check raise range? Keep in mind the suits as well. So here, Berri had the queen of spades. We're going to talk about how suits may be relevant to this decision here. He had the queen of spades, which does not interact with this board. There's no spade on this board. How do you guys think the spade interacts here with the check raise strategy, the check raise range? Who thinks it's a good candidate? Who thinks it's not? Vincent said big blind probably have way more threes and deuces, so small size. What do you mean way more threes and deuces? Because the big blind is not gonna have more 3x and deuce x than the button. Okay, the button is opening all of the suited hands in hands such as king deuce off, queen 3 off, whereas the big blind cannot call these hands. So the big blind cannot call king 3 off, king deuce off, cannot call 7 deuce suited, 6 deuce suited. So the button or the small blind here is actually going to have more of these low pairs, all right? At least in terms of absolute combos. I think splitting makes sense too. I think low frequency, Joseph said. I think it is, said Steve. Seems strong to go in the check raise line. Joseph said you want to block the backdoor flush draws. Ivan said both check call and check raise are fine in my opinion. And Philip said unblocking Willem's calling range with the queen of spades. Vincent said he's a total noob on heads up. I believe most of us here are not very experienced with it, so we're gonna learn together. Joan said it's better when we block the backdoor flush draw. So I think this combo will check raise very small frequency, but in heads up, I don't know. Steve said I think it will be fine at some frequency, and the queen of spades will block some of Willem's floats that are ahead of us. Nice. So suits are definitely relevant when constructing your ranges. Sometimes they're going to be less relevant, sometimes they're going to be more relevant, but very often they're going to be quite relevant. Here in heads up though, you have a situation where both ranges have an extremely high amount of combos. Take a look at the amount of combos in the buttons range here. If we sum all the strategic options here, maybe there's a better way to do it. Yeah, here. So the button has almost 1,000 combos, 1,000 combinations of different hands. That's a really wide range. So naturally, suits interactions are going to be way less relevant than a tighter spot where Both ranges have less combinations. Okay, the big blind has 440 combinations. So it's a lot of combinations. So the blockers, the suits interactions are going to be diluted in such a wide ranges. Okay, but they are in general relevant to the range construction. Once Linus bets small here, Berri is going to have the option to check raise, and I believe most people would be constructing this check raise range very close to what the solver does, maybe not exactly how the solver does, especially because it requires a lot of mixing with different hands. But I think most people have the right ideas. So someone said something about check raising Queen 4 and Jack 4. That's very good. That's very good, and that's a heuristic you can use in pretty much any big blind check raise situation. Someone requested a weekly coaching on a big blind check raise strategy, and well, one heuristic that you can use that is pretty solid is that you should favor hands that have decent backdoor potential in your check raise range, especially on these rainbow boards, right? So we see here Jack 4 suited with backdoor flush draw, Jack 5, Queen 5, Queen 4, all raising at very relevant frequencies. Then you have some natural bluffs, right? So straight draws, 6-4, 6-5, 5-4, ace 5, ace 4, very standard stuff. You have 10x going there, of course. You have the sets, threes and deuces. You have 2 pair, 3 deuce, 10 3, 10 deuce. And you have also some overcards. So overcards with backdoor straight draw. So here we have Queen Jack going in there about 25% of the time. We don't see much difference between the suits. So very similar frequency across all suits here. You also have Jack 9. Jack 9, very similar backdoor straight potential. You can turn a straight draw on a 7, on an 8, on a queen, on a king. So decent hand to put in there. And again, the suits don't seem to matter all that much here for the check raise frequency, given how wide both ranges are. You also have some other backdoors like Jack 6, but overall, very straightforward range construction. You have some 3x and deuce x raising as well for value and protection. It's nice to get some fold equity with those hands. They also can be turned into a bluff in some runouts. So I believe this shouldn't be very difficult for someone who is studying these grids. Of course, you have to come up with some sort of randomization as you're playing, but it shouldn't be all that difficult. Now, what do you guys think about the flop 3-bet strategy? Is that something that Linus should do or that he shouldn't? Should he have a 3-bet range? Should he not? If he should, which hands he should put in there and what frequency he should have with that check raise? How do you guys perceive this flop 3-bet node? What heuristics do you have for having or not having? And if you are going to have it, which hands you put in that flop 3-bet range? Vincent said some nuts, some 10x, some draws, some backdoors. James said top pair would want to 3-bet for protection. Interesting. Joseph said, yeah, I think it's there on 10 high boards, probably around 6%. Nice. So he already gave us an idea of the frequency. So about 6% 3-bet frequency here. What it is about the 10 high board that you think makes it so this strategy should exist? Vincent said only ace 10 for 10x, right? Steve said, yeah, I think it's perfectly fine at low frequency. Krasimir said some overpairs, some 10x, 3x, deuce x. Next, so Krasimir is introducing some 3x and deuce x here in that range. Alvaro is saying strong top pairs and gut shots like 6-4, 6-5. All right. So why is it that we have this heuristic? Well, let me rephrase, because we have this heuristic because we look a lot of grids and we see that a lot of times the 3-bet frequency is not very huge. What do you guys think is the theoretical justification for the 3-bet frequency for the AP player never being really high? It's always something like 5%, 4%, 6%. Why do you guys think that in theory, it's not really a thing for the AP player, or it's a lower or a suboptimal strategy to have a high 3-bet frequency in position? That's a good question. That's a better question. So why is it that having a high 3-bet frequency IP would be a suboptimal strategy for the AP player? Because we reopen the action. What is it that reopening the action causes as a consequence for the AP player? I think you have a good idea in mind, but try to go deeper into what does that mean in theory for the AP player? Philip said, because we can realize equity by calling. To be careful about what we understand by realizing equity, all right? So realizing equity is transforming your equity into actual money, right? Transforming the likelihood of winning the hand into actually winning the hand. When you call the flop, you're not directly winning the hand, right? You're seeing the next street, which gets you closer to winning the hand because you improve your current hand to a stronger hand, but you don't immediately win the hand. The only way to win the hand is at showdown or making your opponent fold. Okay, that's why when we're talking about realizing equity, making your opponent fold is quite important. There's only 2 ways of realizing equity. It's winning at showdown or making your opponent fold. So making your opponent fold is a very, very big part of realizing equity. And when you call, you absolutely don't make your opponent fold, obviously, right? Ivan said, if the big blind check raise range is constructed with hands that have a lot of equity against our most vulnerable value hands on turn equity shifting cards, I think we should consider a bet 3-bet. Nice. So that's mostly the protection argument, right? That most people use, which is, well, the board may run out bet for my hand. There are draws that I can charge. So I'm going to put in a raise here to avoid losing my realization on those bad runouts. That's one way to think about it. We probably discussed this in past coachings where this doesn't always hold true. In fact, you're going to see solver playing very passively when the board gets dynamic, when the board gets too dynamic, because essentially what you're doing when you're raising, when you can expect your hand to decrease in value a lot, is just building a pot you can't fight for. You're putting money into the pot, you're investing money into the pot, and you're not going to win a fraction of the pot in 40% of the runouts. So a lot of times solver will opt to play more passively, wait for the turn to become a brick, and then start putting money in again. Vincent said, let OP the opportunity to re-raise. Nice. So when you reopen the action, you also give the opportunity for your opponent to raise you again. And what does that mean exactly for our EV? We have to think about that. João said, because normally the check raise range is more polarized. Nice. So João now introduces another variable that he's basically saying, well, if the range of my opponent is mostly polarized, why would I fight it with more raises? That's a very good point. That's a very good point, and something that no one has said before here in our discussion, and it makes total sense. Okay, we're going to see that the more polarized the big blind's range is, the less 3-bets we're going to have, and the more merged, the more condensed, the more that range contains middling straight hands, the more we're going to have to develop a raising strategy. Robert said we can get jammed on. It's true. Vincent said we play a smaller SPR. Joseph said because you're lowering the advantage of being IP by lowering the SPR. That is true, but we have to know exactly why that is true. That is true. James said OP needs to re-raise more, or the next street will go check check often when IP once. but IP can always bet next street. Let me read that again. Yeah, so basically they're saying that OOP has to raise more than IP, right? But not necessarily answering why IP shouldn't raise much at all for the later streets, and that's what you meant for our IP advantage. Is it because when facing a check raise, the construction of top range for both players change with regards to equity buckets, and there is a shift to OOP to having the stronger equity? I might have worded this terribly. Yeah, it wasn't easy for me to understand, but I think I got the idea. Again, just focusing on the fact that the out of position players range is mostly polarized. And that's true, okay? So here we see that, of course, on the flop, you're never gonna have a range that is completely polarized because there's 2 streets left to play. So any hand that has some kind of draw is gonna have decent equity. Any pair that has some kind of blocker that you're using as a quote unquote semi-bluff is gonna have a lot of equity. So ranges are never going to be super polarized on the flop, okay? But sometimes they're going to get, they're not going to be merged in a way that you would perceive merge range to be, right? So here we have a graph for the big blinds range. Once you check raises, we have this region here of hands with 40% equity or lower. This is a region of hands like king fives and some random king fours, queen jacks. So you see queen jack has 42% equity on the flop. You may think it as an air hand, a bluffing hand, and it is, because it doesn't beat any hand that will eventually go to showdown, but it has 42% equity. So you're never gonna see a graph that is super polarized on the flop because there's 2 streets left to play. But one thing that's gonna happen is that the equity of those hands is not realizable against a re-raise. So basically what that means is that these hands are always going to fold to further aggression despite them having 43, 44% equity. So you can treat that range as a more polarized range. And then you have this upper region here of hands such as 10x plus. So 10x is going to have around 75% equity. And then 2 pair plus is going to have 80+% equity. Right? So there's a lot going on that is going to make the IP player to have very low frequency 3-bets, but most of the reasons you guys got correctly. First, you have a more polarized range for the OP player. Against that range construction, there's usually not much of a reason for you to re-raise. You're either way ahead or way behind, so you just call or fold. There is an element here of, because of the SPR is still high, you don't want to cap your range by fast playing the top of your range. No one said that, but it's also a very significant thing in these high SPR situations. And you see that the further you increase the SPR, the less you're going to be fast playing these hands. Imagine a situation where you never have threes and deuces when you call the flop. Then villain could blast off with a lot of his 10x and make you suffer with a lot of your bluff catchers. So capping your range is also something that can be problematic here for your IP range. You have a situation also where you're going to be floating very wide against this range. Take a look at the amount of backdoors that we're floating here versus check raise. This creates a dynamic where your range is going to be relatively heavy in high cards and also bluff catchers on the turn, which makes it so that once you start lowering the amount of strong hands in the range, you're going to be facing a lot of aggression. So naturally, once that happens, you want to be slow playing those hands. Okay, so you're going to have a lot of those random airs in your range, a lot of those backdoors. Like we're floating even a hand like 8-7 suited here, pure when we have the backdoor flush draw. So that obviously is going to reflect on the big blind strategy, which also benefits the top of our range. The top of our range is going to face a lot of aggression on further streets versus that polarized range. So overall, there's hardly ever a very significant reason why you should be three betting super, super often. There are some exceptions of boards where the adaptation player's check raise range is going to be very merged. At the top of my head, I could think of low paired boards. But even on low paired boards, it's probably not the best example because on those, you're also going to be floating a lot of air. But let's try and get a quick example here. Let's say the board is 6-6-3. You're going to c-bet. Villain is going to check raise. This check raise construction is now going to contain a lot of middling straight hands. So a lot of pocket pairs, a lot of 3x combos, even some ace highs are being thrown in there. And then once that happens, yeah, not even here we're going to have more three bets. So it's going to be very, very rare that you should use that as part of your strategy. Sometimes, and I think most people at mid stakes do this, they simplify towards just always calling or folding, which is definitely fine against someone who's not going to be trying to exploit you in the very advanced level. At these stakes, this is probably not going to be a thing because players are trying to play and find every single edge possible. So we see here that Linus had the ace 10 as a 3-bet. Now, what about the 4-bet from our friend here, Berri? Let's hear from you guys. What do you think is the 4-bet frequency from the OP player here? What should be the OP 4-bet frequency on the flop on this board? And hands that he should put in there to make up that frequency. Let's see what your intuition says about how often the OP needs to check raise or to 4-bet here on the flop. Very low, especially considering his IP low frequency of 3 bets, but still existent. So already have two very different opinions here. Steve saying very low and Joseph saying 25. And I think Queen Jack is good because it blocks jacks and queens. Yeah, we can see here that jacks is one of the overpairs that 3-bets the flop. So with the jack, we have a blocker to that. Doesn't seem like IP is using, well, IP is using some fractions of Jack X as a bluff too, but it's nice to block jacks in the IP's range, considering is mostly ace 10 and jacks for value. Vincent said low because I'm a nit. I'm asking most about the solver, okay? Not what you would do in practice. Maybe more, to be honest, because OP wants to reduce SPR. So Joseph and Call says are going more into the high frequency. Some people are going into the low frequency. Robert said probably low, weighted towards 3x and deuce X hands. That's nice. Those hands are very good. You can use those. You can use that as a heuristic, very solid heuristic for these spots where a bunch of raises have gone in. Having blockers to the top of your opponent's range is really, really nice. So having a 3 and a deuce, I would expect it to be part of the 4-bet range. Yeah, I mean, it depends on the interpretation of very low, but I'm thinking 10, 15. Cool. Yeah, 10, 15, I would definitely not consider very low, right? Because in any node where there are raises, you're never going to see something like more than 20%, or very rarely going to see a raise strategic option being taken more than 20% of the time. It's usually within that range. So I think 10, 15 could already be considered medium high or even high. All right. All right. So the answer here is that OP should have a lot of 4-bets. The frequency is around 18% of 4-bets on the flop. We see that range construction is, again, relatively straightforward. We see 3s and deuces and 3 deuce going in there. So 2-pair plus going in there. Some draws again. So 6-4, 6-5, 5-4. We also have those bottom pairs and low pairs. So 5 deuce, so pair and backdoor, 4 deuce, pair and backdoor, 5-3, pair and backdoor. We have Jack 3, so a pair and overcard. So we have that. We have some ace highs as well, ace 5, ace 4. Having an ace is decent here. It blocks ace 10 and unblocks bluffs because villain shouldn't be 3-betting the flop with ace high. So ace 5, ace 4, pretty decent candidates. And we have the nasty queen jack there. Right, so the nasty queen jack, even with the queen of spades, is also there at some frequency, about 15, 10% frequency. It's mixing all of the options. We have some 10x going there as well. So some 10-9, 10-5, and ace 10, although big blind almost never has ace 10, and some king 10. So again, here a straightforward range construction, but it is important to acknowledge that this is definitely something you should develop in your game. So again, here, because you're out of position, some people have mentioned this, because you're out of position, you can't realize your equity very well. And what that means is that every time you check, your opponent is going to have the option to bet into you and make you fold. And basically what this means is that when you are out of position, you get bluffed more often. Okay, you get bluffed off of your equity more often. When you are IP, you can just check behind, see the next card, or check behind and see the showdown, and you win the entire pot against your opponent's bluffs. When you're out of position, you don't gain the entire pot against your opponent's bluffs or the bottom of your opponent's range. So that's why it's important to always develop these re-raising strategies. Okay. This also prevents your opponent from putting too much equity into the 3-bet range. If you play a strategy where you never have these re-raises, then a lot of hands in the IP's range are going to be made pure raises or pure 3-bets or pure bets in his range. So you need this strategy to prevent your opponent from putting too much money into the pot with his equity-driven combos. Right, so far both players played really well. Props for Berri for finding this 4-bet here. I don't think many players, especially at mid stakes, but even at high stakes, would find these low frequency 3-bets. And he seems to be one that is capable of finding these plays. Now let's go to the turn, and the river is going to be mostly uninteresting, so we can finish this hand talking mostly about the turn. What do you guys think about Berri's sizing on the turn? And I see this heuristic being used quite often. So the turn paired the board, and he decided to go for a third pot bet. Is that a heuristic you guys use? For example, when you're playing big blind versus button in 6-max, the turn pairs the board and you size down. How do you play when the turn pairs the board in this check raise bet or flop 4 bet and then bet turn? Do you guys think this is a good heuristic? Do you guys think it's should be applied here? What do you think about it? And we can take a look at the button response to the 4-bet. We see here that Linus could start jamming some hands. In the GTO wizard simulation here, the sizings are a bit off. So I made a simulation of my own with closer sizings. We see here that the button could start just jamming all in already with hands like ace 10, jacks, queens, and some blockers to sets. So king 3, king deuce, queen 3 could perfectly just go all in right there. Joseph said he likes it. Who else? Who else likes it? I've seen this happen, BVB. Normally on rainbow board, I have the heuristic that low size on the turn. On the turn, fold 2 over flush draw. What? I didn't get that. Normally on a rainbow board, I have the heuristic that low size is on the turn. fold 2 over flush draw, which are natural floats. Okay, so that size is used to get fold equity from overcards, which are natural floats. I didn't get it. Krasimir said must be good here. Costa said both 1/3 and half seems okay to me. Vincent said seeing all the 3x and deuce x in button, calling the 4-bet. I think this is a good sizing turn to target these hands. Machia said small blind has more 10x, which shifts the nut asymmetry, so sizing down makes sense. All right, so everyone seems to agree here that the sizing is good, but I don't think it is very good for this particular range matchup, okay? When is a good sizing a good idea? Well, we talked about this in the previous coaching and I believe in many others, where a small sizing out of position is going to be very good when you have a high density of middling straight hands, right? So middling straight hands, they really benefit from betting small because in one side, they can get fold equity from air. And on the other side, they can still retain equity versus calling range by forcing villain to call wider. So a small bet out of position is generally a function of a range that has a significant amount of middling strength hands. What happens in the spot is that Berri doesn't have that range matchup or that equity distribution. So it's naturally not going to be a very good option for him. I have here a sim that I ran with very close sizings. I hoped that I had. Let me see if I can open it. With very close sizings, and we see that we're gonna see that the only sizing that gets used is half pot. I'm having trouble opening the sim here, but anyways, once the flop goes 4-bet and Linus calls, and the turn comes up at 10, that should be perceived as a pretty bad card for Berri here. Okay, this is a really, really bad card for Berri in a sense that now his value region is extremely, extremely, extremely narrow. He only has now one combo of 10-3 suited and one combo of 10 deuce suited, which are not even pure 4-bets on the flop. 3 deuce suited is now counterfeited. He's losing to overpairs and any 10x. And then he's left with a very high concentration of air. So he's left with a very high concentration of those deuce x and 3x, which are mostly air at this point. His draws, and then his overcards. Okay, so it's a very, very polarized range with a lot of air. The way to play a very, very polarized range with a lot of air is just to bet any reasonable sizing close to geometric increase of the pot, and then check a lot, which is exactly what happens on the spot. Fortunately, my sim is not working. I wanted to show this to you guys, but it's not working. Here, unfortunately, the GTO wizard, the SPR is different, and the only option they have is a third or all in, which I don't think is very good for this spot. And here, of course, they're not going to go all in on the turn here on such a polarizing situation. You want to basically bet half pot here and go all in on the river for half pot. In the situation